All right, we're back on the record. Please go ahead.
Thank you. So what I did was,
Jay, you may want to raise your question because we were off the record.
Oh, sure. So I was going to ask Mr. Ness, go ahead and following up on Commissioner Lynch's question, explain how you came up with your percentage and your obsolescence.
right, okay. So typically, on these appraisals, obsolescence is only applied to typically three categories: the pumps, compressors, motors, petroleum refining M&E, and petroleum refining rebuilds and replacements. The other items, personal property, typically does not have an obsolescence factor applied to that. So I adjusted I applied an obsolescence factor just on those three categories. And that number was the number that got me to $499,170,000. And that was, like I pointed out earlier, I took it out to 9 decimal places, trying to get it close to what the indicated market value was, $500 million. So I think that is as close as I could get using to $503 million using the spreadsheet and the our return system that I had available to me at the time.
So
that's-
you adopted the 499 million. I mean, so what obsolescence factor did you apply to the three asterisk items in the schedule?
I applied the 0.645992742 factor.
To those three,
Yes, sir.
and so you took 64% roughly of those three items and then added the rest of the items in
With no
to
obsolescence.
come up with the 499,170, which was trying to match the actual sales price itself.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Apologize for the long delay.
And one last follow-up, I refer you to taxpayer exhibit D on page 53, which is an August 17th, 2022 email that you sent to Ms. Parent Khan. And if you look at the second full paragraph, not that you want to read that, but that relates to your discussion of what you did with respect to Puget Sound, correct? I'm sorry.
And speaking to the
I
microphone.
apologize. Just pointing out to the second paragraph of the email on page 53. And that was your explanation of what you did with respect to Puget Sound, correct?
That's correct.
And is it true that in there that you note that the Nelson complexity factor for Puget Sound is identical to the Lake Charles refinery?
That's correct.
And you explain the other adjustments you made for equivalent distillation capacity related to the Nelson complexity factor?
That's correct.
I don't have any other comments or questions for Mr. Cisneros.
All right, thank
And
you.
actually, I do have just a couple of quick follow-ups just because I heard a number I'd heard before. Mr. Cisneros, again, Brian Eddington, you testified a moment ago, I want to make sure I understand this, that you calculated the obsolescence factor out to 9 digits because you were trying to get as close as possible to 503 million.
Yes, sir.
And what does the 503 million figure represent?
The 503 million. $503,620,000 figure is from the sales analysis of the Puget Sound refinery sales on page 56.
Okay. It's kind of finally all clicking. So I want to make sure that I understand. So what you did was you did are you familiar with the 3 approaches to value under Louisiana law?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so you did a market approach analysis based upon a single sale. And then what you're referring to as economic obsolescence is simply an attempt to reconcile the RCNLD with that sales price?
That's correct.
Thank you. No further questions.
All right,
No further questions.
that wrap it up?
Yes, sir.
Okay, any more witnesses, Mr. Adams?
No, sir.
Okay, all right. Well, Mr. Eddington,
Good
Please
afternoon,
go
Mr.
ahead.
Chairman. Again, Brian Eddington, on behalf of the Calcasieu Parish Assessor's Office, is my first witness. I would like to call Assessor Wendy Aguilar.
Yeah, if you don't mind.
Ms. Aguilar, could you first identify yourself for the record?
Wendy Curfew Aguilar, Calcasieu Assessor.
Before we get into what you and your office did, I want to talk about Mr. Cisneros' testimony. You were here when he testified, were you not?
Yes, sir.
As a matter of fact, just a moment ago, he
pull
explained,
that microphone close.
and just a moment ago, he explained that how he calculated obsolescence was based upon a market approach valuation of the Puget Sound refinery, and he called the differential economic obsolescence, purely a tool to get down to what he believed the market approach valuation was. Did you hear that testimony?
Yes, sir, I did.
And you're familiar with the market approach to value, are you not?
Yes, sir, I am.
In your capacity as assessor, when you do a market approach analysis, valuation, do you ever base that upon a single sale?
No, sir, I would not.
Is that not particularly true in complex commercial transactions?
Absolutely.
And the entirety of Mr. Cisneros' attempt to create an imputed value is based upon a comparative analysis of the Puget Sound refinery to the Lake Charles refinery, is it not?
To the best of my understanding, yes, sir.
I mean, he had talked about things such as the Nelson complexity factor, let me pull the document up. I want to make sure I don't misquote him. The Nelson complexity factor, the crude capacity in barrels a day, and the equivalent distillation capacity. Was your office provided any information regarding any of those factors you would need to reconstruct his analysis?
I believe that information was not provided until the Board of Review appeal to my office.
And again, what was provided to you was just numbers on a page, correct? Was any supporting documentation ever provided to you?
No, sir, I believe it was just either an email or fax or brought over from the police jury when they received the appeal, or possibly it was sent to us directly. I'm not sure. Sometimes they get sent to us directly, sometimes they don't, and the police jury brings them over, but it would have been the documentation that you see there.
And again, to be clear, we're talking about page 56 of the taxpayer exhibits, correct?
Yes, sir, I believe so.
And most importantly, you were not provided with a copy of the sale from Shell to Hollywood Frontier Corporation, were you?
No, sir, I was not.
And if you were to conduct a market approach valuation of a commercial asset, particularly in a complex transaction, would you need to review that document?
That document and any further information that could be provided from the buyer or the seller, that would be in a deed or some sort of conveyance transfer that would have been recorded for us to have.
So you have no way of knowing whether $350 million actually represents the actual unadjusted sales price, do you?
No, sir, I do not.
And would you not also want to know what the adjusted sales price was in a transaction of this magnitude?
Absolutely.
And you have no way of knowing whether the crude capacity of the Puget Sound refinery is 141,550 barrels a day, do you?
No, sir, I do not.
And do you have any way of knowing whether the Nelson complexity factor of the Puget Sound refinery is 9.0, do you?
No, sir, I do not.
And of course, based on those two numbers, you also don't know that the equivalent distillation capacity of the Puget Sound refinery is 1.278 million barrels a day, do you?
No, sir, I do not.
Let's turn to what your office did. I want to go back a few years. When did you first become assessor of Calcasieu Parish?
I was elected in 2011.
And can you tell me a little bit about your office's assessment of Phillips 66 since that time?
We have dealt with different tax reps over the years, for this refinery as well as many others. One of the things that happened when I first took office was we lost some staff in our personal property department. And so therefore I hired Pritchett and Abbott for their expertise with these types of big industrial facilities. When we receive the information from Pritchett and Abbott, we do go over it as well. But we do rely on their expertise for the valuation of this property. Additionally, I look at all factors given to me by the company to consider any and all obsolescence requests that I may get. And therefore, we can be fair and accurate and uniform between all the different industrial companies that we have.
Now, prior to 2018, Phillips 66 had never protested or appealed your values, had they?
Not to my recollection, no, sir.
And again, to be clear, since you became assessor, I understand you may not know what happened in prior years. Can you tell me what happened in 2018 in conjunction with your office's assessment of Phillips 66?
So in it's actually 2019, we discovered a large increase in valuation between the 2018 value and the 2019 value.
Now, when you say you discovered it, what do you mean you discovered it?
The rendition that was provided in 2019 was significantly higher than it had been in previous years. And in reviewing that information, it was discovered that a lot of assets had not been being rendered prior to 2019. So the increase in valuation from 2018 to 2019 was significant.
Now, again, your research disclosed these were not newly acquired assets that appeared in 2019, were they?
No, sir. From everything that we've discovered, it was assets that were either not being rendered or were being rendered at a reduced valuation prior to 2019.
Okay, and you testified that the result of including this property, again, which Phillips reported to you, correct?
Yes, this is all on renditions.
Resulted in a significant increase in the assessed value of their property. What did you do to address that increase? So let me try this another way. Can you turn to Exhibit 5 and the assessor's exhibits?
So understanding that this was going to be a significant increase in valuation and therefore a significant increase in taxes, we began to work with Phillips on an adjustment that we could make for obsolescence that would help ease into these new valuations as we moved forward. And so therefore in 2019, we granted a 30% obsolescence based on the new figures that were provided.
I want to make sure I understand this. You graded 30% based upon the new numbers that were provided. Was this an attempt to actually calculate obsolescence, or are you simply trying to transition in the increase in value resulting from these items of property that had not been reported in prior years?
We were simply trying to transition into the new numbers, and ease the tax burden, to be honest.
And again, look at Exhibit 5, it looks like based upon that reduction, you reduced our assessment from 965 million to 747 million, correct?
That is correct on this parcel.
And what about 2020, the year of COVID? Can you run through what you did in 2020?
2020 was a difficult year in Calcasieu Parish. We had COVID, we had 2 hurricanes. At some point, we had a flood, a freeze, tornado. That goes into 21, I believe. But in 20, we realized that there were significant damages. Hurricane Laura brought significant damages to our parish. And we did grant not only some obsolescence based on the condition of easing into valuations, but also some additional obsolescence due to damages from Hurricane Laura to this property
Let me ask you.
and
real quick-
Delta.
Let me ask you real quickly,
Yes, sir.
the 20% that was applied in 2022.
Yes,
Was
sir.
that based on an analysis of obsolescence? Or I heard the testimony that it was based on transitioning into the higher numbers.
I'm sorry, that was in 2019.
I'm looking on page 2 of 5.
Yes, sir.
2022 granted 20%.
When we get to 2022. So
Due to hurricane recovery and 2019 additions. So that's not obsolescence that was granted.
So what we did was we wanted to continue to ease those burdens. And so we continued to grant obsolescence. But the conversation before hurricanes, if you don't include the hurricanes, was, look, we understand that this has made a significant increase in your valuation, and we're willing to work with you over several years to help ease you into where you actually should be, based on your renditions that you're now providing.
Oh, and I understand that, but it doesn't sound like obsolescence. It just sounds like a negotiated value, so to speak.
We're actually gonna get into that to it. I can do it right now. Assessor Aguilar, and we talked about 20 and 21. It's really the same thing. These were continued. Now for 2022, you testified earlier that you have for several years utilized Pritchard and Abbott to value Phillips 66 assets, correct?
That is correct.
And she's going to testify in a moment, but a copy of Ms. Khan's appraisal report is in the record, and it included a recommended 11% reduction that she had calculated. And again, we're going to testify, she will testify to that in a moment. Can you tell me how you ended up at 20% when your appraiser's analysis had recommended an 11% reduction in value for obsolescence?
Based on my discretion, I allowed additional reduction for the continued increase in valuation that they had been experiencing since 2019.
So I mean, it's either obsolescence or it's a negotiated number to ease into the transition. Is it 11% obsolescence and 9% transitioning or what?
Well, there was a lack of negotiation, I will say that, because the numbers that were being put into the renditions as a new valuation per se, based on a sales analysis, were significant and unable to be proven. And so therefore, there was no further real negotiation, as you would say. This was strictly my decision to grant more obsolescence or grant a further reduction above and beyond what my appraiser had come up with, based on utility of the facility and the renditions sent.
Okay, well, all I'm saying is that we seem to be jumping back and forth from easing into the bigger numbers and talking obsolescence. Easing into the bigger numbers is not obsolescence. That's trying to work with the taxpayer to ease into the bigger value.
Okay,
Obsolescence is something entirely different.
okay.
And that's critical to us, because they're requesting obsolescence. So we're trying to understand what, what was going on.
So,
what
so
you're
the
doing.
initial obsolescence that was based on my appraiser's valuation was 11%. And we granted more than that. So I think it would be a combination of obsolescence and a combination of easing into a new valuation.
All right, thank you.
Okay, Ms. Aguilar, I think that's the whole story. Again, we're gonna have Ms. Khan to come up and testify. You testified how you came up. Again, you had a recommended 11% obsolescence. You increased that to 20. Is there anything else you would like to add for the commission's benefit?
Simply a statement that, we base our value on the renditions, the tables as they are set, and then any obsolescence or adjustments that we feel are fair to the property owner. And we've always done that with this company. We do it with all of our companies in Calcasieu. And so that would be all I'd have to add.
Thank you, Ms. Aguilar. I have no further questions. Please answer any question the commissioners or Mr. Adams may have.
Thank you. Assessor Aguilar, nice to see you again.
Nice to see you.
Just a couple of questions.
Yes, sir.
Taxpayer Exhibit D is an email dated August 17th, 2022 to Ms. Karen Khan from Mr. Cisneros. Have you ever seen this document before?
Can you tell me what page that's
Page
on?
53 of our
53.
Yes, sir, I have.
In fact, you're copied on it, correct?
I am.
And in this document, Mr. Cisneros, lays out what he's doing with respect to the Puget Sound refinery and crude capacity, Nelson complexity factor, all those different things that he testified about. And Mr. Eddington asked you about that. And my question is you had this on August 17th. And I don't remember when the rolls were open or opening, but my question is, did you or Ms. Khan ever ask Mr. Cisneros for any of this data that he refers to in his email?
I would have to refer to Ms. Khan as she was handling that.
Um, But based on this email, these concepts were presented to the assessor's office on August 17th.
Yes, to the best of my knowledge, this was presented to our office. This email was presented to our office. I don't think there was any of the things that we have already talked about as far as supporting data, as far as deeds or anything like that.
Fair enough. But the attachments were included as well as Mr. Cisneros.
Mr. Cisneros' analysis, yes.
Okay.
And please understand, we get lots of tax rep analysis. Lots and lots and lots of tax rep analysis.
I understand. I'm just trying to make sure I understand kind of where everything was.
Yes, sir.
And Phillips 66 certainly appreciates all that you've worked with them in the past. So I want to make sure that's on the record and they did in fact provide and render the assets that sort of led to the increase.
Yes.
And so let me ask you this question. With respect to these concepts that Mr. Cisneros talked about, do you recall doing any internet research to look to see if any of this was accurate or verifiable?
I left that to my appraiser with Pritchard and Abbott.
Okay. And one last thing, with respect to the proper measure, that's fair market value, correct?
Yes, sir.
And that's defined by the commission's rules and regulations
Yes, sir.
to be what a willing buyer would pay a willing seller under normal market conditions with all relevant facts in it. Now,
Yes, sir.
I'm paraphrasing. but
Yes, sir.
I don't have any further comments.
All right, thank you.
No regret.
Thank you, Ms. April. As our next witness, I'd like to call Ms. Karen Khan. Good afternoon, Ms. Khan. Could you please identify yourself for the record?
My name is Karen Khan. I'm the Director of Industrial and Utility Appraisals at Pritchard and Abbott. I have a bachelor's in engineering and chemical engineering from the University of Texas at Austin and almost 15 years of project engineering experience prior to my appraisal work. And now I've worked in appraisals for almost 5 years.
And Ms. Khan, just to clarify, Assessor Aguilar had testified a few minutes ago that some years ago, she hired Pritchard and Abbott to value Phillips 66. How long have you been involved in the appraisal of, again, the Lake Charles or Calcasieu Parish Phillips 66 facility for the Calcasieu Parish Assessor?
Okay, well, for myself, I've been appraising this particular property since 2020. I started in the summer of 2019, and so that was after the 2019 tax year. And so I was involved with the, under the purview of my trainer, Daryl Adaway, who was the person at Pritchard and Abbott who inspected and appraised this property in 2020 and prior years.
And a copy of your appraisal report is cross-referenced as an assessor's exhibit, but I will tell you, I just picked it up by reference, so it is Taxpayer Exhibit E. Could you tell me if this is in fact a copy of your work product?
Yes, this is a preliminary appraisal that was provided to P66 as a preliminary appraisal.
No, you say P66. Let's be precise. Phillips 66 in
Sorry.
Calcasieu Parish, correct?
Phillips 66 in Calcasieu Parish. Yeah.
Okay, listen, instead of doing the normal question and answer format, why don't you tell us about your appraisal, what your findings were, what your recommendations to the assessor were specifically regarding obsolescence?
Okay, so how Pritchard and Abbott works is we go and inspect a property in Louisiana that we are contracted to do. We look at the taxpayer's rendition, and then we appraise it using the taxpayer's provided data. So in 2022, Phillips 66 provided the rendition that the Lat 5 that's in the taxpayer's documents. I think that was Exhibit 1 of the taxpayer documents. In addition, they also
Excuse me
provided,
one moment.
yes,
Our binder, for the valuation 2022 prepared by Pritchard and Abbott is empty. There's nothing in there. Is that what was submitted?
Taxpayer Exhibit E. Taxpayer Exhibit
The
E.
4.
Sorry. Yeah, on my, to avoid filing duplicate documents, I adopted it by reference
Okay,
to Taxpayer Exhibit E, which is page 67 through 71 of the taxpayer exhibit.
all right,
So
not a
yeah,
problem.
Exhibit 4 is simply a placeholder sheet saying cross-referencing to these documents.
Okay, no problem.
that, yeah, the rendition was in there too. But anyway, in addition to the Lat 5 that the taxpayer provided, they also provided the Exhibit 1A assessor documents that I have here, which shows their 2021 actual crude runs barrel per day. You can see at the top of page 2, their 2022 budget projected barrels per day, which turned out not to be a really accurate guess, but that's okay. That's in the future. And then they also provide the 2021 average contractors on site because that's something that they didn't have available at the time of the inspection. So if you look at Assessor Exhibit 2, those are a copy of the Pritchard and Abbott inspection notes of the Phillips 66 Calcasieu Parish refinery. And you can note that Pritchard and Abbott has been appraising the site since 2014.
Okay, I want to be clear now, you did a physical inspection of this property, correct?
Yes, that is correct. Since 2022, I have been at this site every year doing a physical inspection. In particular, in this Exhibit 2, I want to draw your attention to a few things about the ultra low sulfur diesel unit, since that's a topic that we've been discussing. So in about the middle of the first page, they mention it's almost, I bet it's about the fourth bullet point from the bottom. They talk about they would have things that they would have if the site was built today, which indicate functional obsolescence, and they include that ultra low sulfur diesel there. Sorry, working the. Okay, then on page 3, hang on. Yeah, so here at the second page, they mention about sending the capital spending and the contractors and stuff. But the middle bullet point on page 2, they mentioned that they're considering adding ultra low sulfur diesel in 2025 to 2026. That's what they conveyed to me during the inspection meeting. Page 3 is the list of additions in 2021 by major grouping description that P66 provided to me during the meeting. And then page 4 is the site inspection notes from 2021. And you can see the highlighted, I highlighted that there, saying that most of capital spending for 2021 through 2022 is for ultra low sulfur diesel ULSD improvements. That's what they told me during the inspection in 2021. Page 5 is the list of projects that they provided in 2021. And you see they have actual costs there and stuff, some more information than was provided in 2022. And I made notes when we drove past the various units during the inspection. On page 6, you see that in 2020, there was no site inspection because of the COVID pandemic, because these inspections are held in the spring. And that was right when the pandemic had started. Okay, so in 2019, my coworker wrote, due to that yellow highlighted thing, due to international, oh, it's not highlighted. Okay. I'm sorry. Okay, it's in the middle of the page. It says site, well, at the top of the page, site inspection, May 1st, 2019. And it's in the second paragraph in that site inspection. The first line says, due to International Maritime Organization, IMO, they still cannot justify ultra low sulfur diesel production. Current projections are 2022 plus. Okay, and then in 2017, you can see in the middle of that paragraph, right after it says boiler B8 will replace B5 in 2018. 2 reactors, 15 million total for ultra low sulfur diesel kept under nitrogen blanket, scheduled for installation in 2021 and are still on site. And then in 2016, the last sentence in the inspection notes from 2016 say 2 reactors, 15 million total for ultra low sulfur diesel kept under nitrogen blanket, scheduled for installation in 2021. And then we get to where the site was just starting to be inspected. Okay, the next thing I've started doing is Exhibit 3 in the assessor's exhibits, appellee evidence. And this is called the Pritchard and Abbott 2022 Lake Charles Refinery Original Cost Comparison. And I started doing this when I was updating renditions, and I work in, I update my models for all the companies that I inspect and appraise. And I started noticing big changes in original cost numbers in some cases. And so there's a lot of numbers to look at. And so this is something to check for any kind of large anomalies and see if there was anything that needed to be looked at further. So on page,
Roll-up cost. Is that what you discovered that was underreported before? Is that it?
roll up cost on there, lap 5, P66, Phillips 66 in Lake Charles has started combining original cost numbers for prior years and reporting like buildings 2009 and older, and then having a total number of original costs for older time. So I have history of renditions all the way back to 2014 when Pritchard and Abbott started looking at this. And so I have in my models all the information that the taxpayers rendered. So I can add it all up and see if there was any difference between adding the numbers up or not. And in some cases, there wasn't any difference. Of course, there will be a value difference based on the index tables and things, but just for a basic original cost comparison, are they rendering stuff that makes sense? That's kind of the question that this document is trying to put a pin on. So you can see that there weren't too many anomalies in 2022 for Phillips 66 at Lake Charles. The biggest ones were in, some have big percentages, but they're not big values. So the biggest ones were in the machinery and equipment, which for Pritchard and Abbott, we include pumps, motors, compressors, fire suppression, safety equipment, and petroleum refining equipment all in this category, because in our opinion, they have the same life expectancy and depreciation. And so you can see that they removed 12,400,000. This is on page 4 and kind of the middle of the page. They removed $12,468,496 out of that category from 2001 and prior. And there was also a $33 million difference at the bottom of the page for M&E 2020. And so I bring these to the attention of the assessor to see if they wanted to do anything about it. And there wasn't any, there wasn't any defined thing to go against, because this has happened before in other parishes, and I just bring it to their attention. And it's something that the assessors keep in mind when they're negotiating with the taxpayer. Okay, so then I put it into my appraisal, which you've seen in the referenced taxpayer document E. And so we have all the categories and all the original costs. and the index factors from chapter 25 of the Louisiana tax laws with the depreciation percent good from those schedules. And then we recommend an obsolescence factor to the parish to consider. It's up to the.
Okay, and you have an obsolescence factor of 0.89, which is an 11% reduction for obsolescence. Is that correct?
That is correct. That's what my study recommended. And if you can look at the assessor's exhibit 5, which is called obsolescence notes, I will talk about that.
Right, and that was my question. Can you kind of explain how you came up with that 89% obsolescence factor or again, 11% reduction?
Yes. So on page 3 is where my discussion starts. So the
And to be clear, we're talking page 3 of Assessor Exhibit 5, correct?
yes, page 3 of exhibit 5. And it starts out with Phillips 66 Lake Charles 2022 P&A Economic Obsolescence Calculation title on there. So I have a paragraph describing the Chilton factor. It dates back to approximately 1950, and it was originally used to estimate construction costs of industrial processes and plants based on production capacity. It recognizes the exponential relationship encountered when scaling a known cost by using a ratio between a known and a proposed production capacity. And so it's based on economies of scale. So that means constructing a facility that has twice the production capability does not necessarily double the construction cost. So the equation is cost scale as a percent, which is the known production capacity, which is when we use it for this functional calculation, it's the utilization rate of the vacuum column. How many barrels of crude did this refinery process over capacity A, proposed design capacity, which is the total design capacity of the refinery. And this number I can get from EIA has a refinery report where they publish all of the capacities of all the different units over the years. It's updated every year. So that's where I can get the total capacity. And the taxpayer provides me what they processed the prior year in 2021 for this case, which I showed you in that document at the beginning. So in it, which is the exponent or scale factor, is normally 0.6 or 0.7, and we typically use 0.6. And so at the bottom of page 3, I have on the left-hand side, I have the calculation for how I got to the 0.8897% good. It's 214,000, which is the number that Phillips 66 Lake Charles provided me, over the plant capacity, which is 260,000, which is the number I got from the EIA. And it's just the plant utilization factor to the 0.6 power. And that's how you get the 0.8897. In some cases, P&A will add a 50% floor based on market conditions and how a particular industry is doing in some other situations. But in this case, we did not feel a 50% floor was necessary.
Out of curiosity, does anybody else use that 50% floor beside Pritchard and Abbott?
I don't have any knowledge that would indicate yes or no to that. The only handout I can find on Google is authored by Pritchard and Abbott employee.
That's the same. I mean, I went looking
Yes.
to see if
Mhm.
anybody else uses it. And the only thing I can find is what's on there published by Pritchard and Abbott.
The reason that they did that is because if you had theoretically, if you had zero utilization, that would give a percent good of 0%, which might not be appropriate in a property tax situation. So you
Yeah.
can put a floor there. So if it, even if it is zero, you have something less than a zero value. But it's not, economic obsolescence is something that there's a lot of things that go into consideration. Utilization is to me a good indicator of obsolescence, but there's different ways to take the utilization depending on the severity or the longevity, I would think, of the situation that produced that utilization.
So the floor is generally not used, only in extreme circumstances.
No, I use the floor quite a lot. And in other appraisal cases, there are floors because, and I'm talking about other appraisal types and stuff, because sometimes companies want to do things like depreciate their assets down to zero. And so we have to have floors in places where they make sense and are needed.
And Ms. Khan, maybe I can help clarify. This 50% floor, that's simply, you would not recommend an obsolescence reduction in excess of 50%. Correct.
If we use the floor.
Right.
Mhm.
And in this case, though, the floor didn't come into play because again, your obsolescence calculations were at approximately 89%, correct?
Yes, that was without the floor. You could see that calculation on the right. If I put that 50% floor, it would have made it 95% good or whatever it was, or something. You went specifically,
So in fact,
It
by
was
not
90
using it
for
in
the
this
floor.
case, you gave them the larger decrease than if you had used the floor, correct?
yes, that is correct, because I don't expect this utilization rate to be of long-standing. There's a lot of variability in the refining market. And so I don't think the utilization rate needed a 50% floor in this case. Okay, so then on page 4, I talk about the 0.8 that the assessor's office awarded, which included some hurricane recovery. And that 0.8 is even lower than their straight utilization rate, which was 0.82, I think. Let me look. Yeah, 0.8231 was their actual, just basic utilization rate in 2022 that the taxpayer reported to me. Okay, and so we do typically only apply this to the main company machinery and equipment. And at the bottom of page 4, you can see that's 96.76% of the cost. So it's a significant portion of this facility. And in most cases, it's a significant portion of the facility that receives economic obsolescence consideration. And then on
So
page,
where was the 11%? What was it applied to?
in my, it can be applied to different things based,
But no, I'm not worried about different things.
yes.
In this
Okay,
instance,
so in the preliminary appraisal that I sent Chris Cisneros, it was applied everywhere because I think we had applied obsolescence everywhere the prior year because of the hurricanes were really bad. And so I hadn't updated that part of because it was a preliminary appraisal, I hadn't updated it to reflect the current, what the assessor currently wanted to do.
so where was it applied?
It was applied to everywhere on that preliminary.
So in 2022,
No,
the
on,
original cost, an additional, after all the calculations and all, an additional 11% would be deducted from that total.
in this one appraisal that I sent to Chris Cisneros, it was, oh, the documents, okay, I'm sorry. Exhibit E, I have the obsolescence factor of 0.89 applied to every equipment category. But
Every category,
yes,
furniture and fixtures, lab
Mhm.
equipment, mobile machinery.
yes, but that was updated later to only include the refining equipment.
Okay, well, that's
With-
what I'm asking. Where was the 11% obsolescence applied?
In the final number, it wasn't applied anywhere because the 0.8% good, so the 20% obsolescence was applied to the refining equipment in the final number. And that ends up being a lower value than 11% applied everywhere.
Mr. Chairman, for help, I'd be willing to call Assessor Aguilar up after Ms. Khan's finished.
Okay, so on page 5 of exhibit 5 in the assessor's documents, exhibits, I have some notes on depreciation. So in the Property Assessment Valuation Third Edition by the International Association of Assessing Officers, they say depreciation is directly related to utility and it's either curable or incurable. And if it's curable or incurable is directly dependent on a value of an agent in production, the principle of contribution. Because curable depreciation is economically prudent to correct. So it's justified by an increase in value that's equal or greater than the cost to correct it. That's curable depreciation. Incurable depreciation is not economically justified to correct. So the cost to cure it is not supported by the loss in value. So on the question of the ultra low sulfur diesel unit at the Calcasieu Parish Lake Charles P66 refinery, they seem to be working on it in the inspection notes sometimes. Now they say 2025 is now the target, but it's been a question for a long time. But if it doesn't really matter if they have it or if they don't, because if they had it, the cost of adding it was equal to the value that it added or greater than equal to the value that it cost to add it. And if they don't have it, then it's then you calculate that by a loss of income. But they don't provide, they did Phillips 66 Lake Charles refinery did not provide any income data. But they did provide the utilization rate, which is the amount of barrels that they processed in 2021, which is how much crude oil the refinery is able to process. And that would, despite whatever functional deficiencies and outside market conditions that exist, they were able to process that amount of oil. And refining is very capital intensive. So they don't process oil unless it's economically feasible to do so. I know in other refineries that I inspect, they process less oil when it's not, when the margins are low. Okay, so that's what I had to say about obsolescence. Then if we can turn our attention to Exhibit 6. Yes. Very briefly, we're gonna run through this. So refinery statistics. So the Louisiana Gulf Coast, page 2, you can see this is from the EIA. I want to see. Yes, EIA. This is the Louisiana Gulf Coast. And you can see the operable capability, operating at idle, and operable utilization rate for the state. In 2022, it was 97.1 across all of the refineries in the Louisiana Gulf Coast. And you can also note the gross input to atmospheric crude oil distillation units was pretty stable from 2017 to 2019. Then in 2020, it dipped. And it's been decreasing. So 2022 is lower than in 2020 even, well, the operable capacity. So because of the refinery closures and conversions, there's less operable capability in this market. The natural gas price, I included this just because of the one exhibit from the taxpayer page. Well, Chris Cisneros had something that he sent me, and it was zoomed in on a certain amount to show that it was increasing, but natural gas was high last year in particular, but it's you see it's come down some from the really high part that it was at. That was on page 3. Page 4 is the margins that Phillips 66 Lake Charles provided me, that graph. And page 5 is what the margins are doing for the United States Gulf Coast since December of 2021. You can see that, and that's from SP Global Commodity Insights. And then we have various news articles that we have record high global diesel cracks, which is the price difference between the cost of the barrel of oil and the price of the finished product. And the increased refinery downtimes tighten supply. In the Wall Street Journal, refiners expected to enjoy windfall profits on gasoline. And Phillips 66 is there in that list. And another story that was in the newspaper about record oil profits. And on page 12, there's the refining margins, and it's the short-term energy outlook. U.S. refinery utilization will be relatively high this summer due to the strong wholesale prices, and that shows the crack that they were talking about, the crude oil refiner costs versus the prices that they get for it, the price differential. And I don't want to bore everybody, so there's more. USDC margins hit 5-year highs as cold weather hits the plants. And natural gas prices, the previous one was gasoline, that's natural gas, which has started to come down. And then electric cars on page 19. If you don't have color, it's going to be hard to see. But on the chart at the top left-hand color corner of page 19, there's the biggest chunk at the bottom. You can't even see. It's smaller than the white line because the white line is, oh, it is actually the white line because the white line is the yellow, is plug-in electric hybrid. It's okay, so the electric battery electric is blue. So yeah, without color, it's almost impossible to see this chart. Can you guys look at my color screen? The light blue is like steel. Diesel is this brownish color. So you see diesel cars. You can't even really see in this chart. Hybrids are, battery electric is the green. So after this one hash line in this part, you guys can try this upstairs. Those are all projections. So the battery electric green is, you can't even really see it in comparison to what the current like inventory of cars are on the market. So it's not a significant portion of the vehicle inventory that exists in the market currently. And even after projections, it's still not a significant inventory. And this was in 2021 from the EIA, the U.S. Energy Information Administration, yes. And then in 2022, it didn't change much. That was after this, but and then the last 5 pages are an article from RBN Energy on how they think that the EIA was too optimistic on how many electric cars were going to be, how they projected the electric cars in the market. They thought it was too optimistic based on a review of what happened in Denmark, I think it was. They sell almost all their cars that are bought are electric, and it still didn't really impact their gasoline usage. So you can read that if you have the interest. So, and then finally, Exhibit 7.
You know what, why don't you, before you go to 7, that's a great segue. You were here earlier when Mr. Cisneros testified, were you not?
Yes, I was.
And was it your understanding that what they're requesting is, it's interesting, they're calling it external obsolescence, but what they're wanting is a market approach valuation, and they're using external obsolescence as a reconciliation factor. Is that an accurate understanding?
According to my understanding.
And again, his market analysis based upon a single sale for the Puget Sound refinery, correct?
Yes, that's what he did, and according to my understanding.
And I mean, that request was submitted to you. They asked you to do a market reduction, again, based upon this single sale without actually providing you the sale or any of the supporting documentation, correct?
They did ask me to consider that, yes.
And tell me what you did in your analysis with that request, and your thoughts upon using the market approach as almost as a proxy for the market approach as an external obsolescence reduction.
Okay, so in my professional opinion, I do not believe the market approach really applies to refineries because of the reasons that I list in my Exhibit 7 of the assessor's exhibits. So we have these 2 houses here, and they're both houses in the way that 2 refineries are refineries. But would you try to value both these houses using two factors? It's just not how market approach works. Or these 2 houses on the next page, when one's in San Francisco and the other is in Oklahoma. So, you know, there's a location difference there. So in refineries, we can use the Nelson complexity factor. It's a composite of capacity ratios and cost factors in comparison to crude distillation, which has been assigned the complexity factor of 1. The crude distillation has the complexity factor of 1, but none of the other factors are definitively defined as they depend on the cost ratios of various refining components, which are not readily available.
Now, can you tell me what that means? So the Nelson complexity factor is not just a number that everyone would agree on, is it?
No, it's not. And I can explain more in my exhibit. So you can buy one from the Oil and Gas Journal for $2,200. They can tell you what their idea or opinion of the Nelson complexity factor is. You can, and that's those excerpts are what Chris Cisneros provided to me, those excerpts with showing various picked refineries with the Oil and Gas Journal listed. So that's what he provided. But refineries sometimes publish on their websites what their idea of the Nelson complexity factor is. It doesn't happen a lot, but it has happened. And P&A also has a calculator to calculate Nelson complexity factor. So on page 7, you can see the Lake Charles Nelson complexity factor, the Phillips 66 on their website. They published their Nelson complexity factor as 11.1. In this reported complexity factor for Martinez, I have an excerpt from an investor's article, which says the Nelson complexity index is 16.1. Then on page 9 of exhibit 7 of the assessor's exhibits, you can see the P&A complexity calculator with the Martinez, the Lake Charles, and the Pasadena. Now, I did use the capacities that they had in those years that they sold. So we don't know what year, what capacities in all those published numbers, what capacity of units was used. But basically, you get all the units.
Oh, that's the national alert. Now we need 5-minute break.
Okay, well, I'm not, there's not too much more for me to do.
Must
I
be
can
telling
done
us
pretty
Congress is
quick.
back in session.
So you
Another
can-
72 votes on who the speaker is going to be.
Oh, we're off the record? Sorry. Okay, so we're looking at, currently we're looking at P&A's, the Nelson complexity factor calculation that we can do. And I've plugged in the numbers. Why am I so, I don't get the emergency alert? I don't know. Okay. Am I back on? Well, we have a calculator. P&A has a calculator, and I plugged in the values from the E&I refining report for the various years of these cells. Okay, and on page 11, in the middle of the page, you can see the P&A Nelson complexity index calculated, the refinery reported, and the Oil and Gas Journal value. And you can see that they hardly ever match. That's on page 11 at the bottom of the table. Okay, so the refinery in that market approach that was provided by Phillips 66 in Calcasieu Parish, the refinery size comparison was a direct ratio. He did put the 0.6 factor there too sometimes, but it was a direct ratio of the atmospheric crude oil distillation capacity, which assumes that the capacity to cost ratio is constant for both comparison refineries. And we know that size is the volume of the vessel as a function of the cube of the radius, while the surface, which is the cost, is a function of the square of the radius. And so there are significant economies of scale in a refinery, though they are limited by the maximum size of some units. So it's not a simple relationship, is my point from page 12. And then sales price issues, refinery sales price issues. So the purchase price usually includes other assets in addition to the refinery. And there's no good way to calculate the contributory value. And so I put some examples, which are probably illegible if the highlighting, no, it didn't. The highlighting didn't block it out, but, so on page 14, this is the Puget Sound Refinery, and we've already talked about the on-site cogeneration facility and deep water marine dock and light product loading rail and rail terminal and storage tanks. We talked about that and the Pasadena refinery sale. In addition, on page 15, in addition to the refinery, Chevron acquired a Petrobras subsidiary that operates the refinery and owns PRSI Trading, which trades in crude and refined products markets. And it also owns some kind of 5.1 million barrel storage farm and an additional 143 acres of land along the Houston Ship Channel. And the Billings refinery sale on page 16. In addition to the refining assets, the transaction includes a 65% interest in adjacent cogeneration facility and an expansive PAD 4 and 5 marketing and logistics network. And the logistics assets include the wholly owned 70-mile, 55,000 barrel per day Silvertip pipeline, a 40% interest in the 750-mile, 65,000 barrel per day Yellowstone refined products pipeline, and 7 refined product terminals. So they have total storage. They have a lot of total additional storage. So what was the value of that? And their additional refinery adjustment issues. So right now there's not a way to easily adjust for additional refinery differences such as specific location, shipping operations, effective age, maintenance, management, performance, and pipeline access, to name just a few. A refinery that's had a massive accident that killed people and then sold after that obviously has more obsolescence than a refinery that is well maintained and doesn't have accidents that kill employees.
So, Ms. Cobb, would it be fair to say that if all you have is the crude capacity at a undocumented sales price and a claimed Nelson complexity factor, that's not enough to do a meaningful apples to apples comparison for a sales approach valuation?
Not in my opinion. My last exhibit that I just want to briefly draw your attention to is Exhibit 11. That's the list of the properties in Louisiana that I inspected and appraised in 2022. And I've underlined the ones that are also refineries. And the methodology that was used in the Phillips 66 Lake Charles refinery was the same methodology that was applied to all these other refineries that I appraised and inspected.
Thank you, Ms. Cotton. I have no further questions for you. Is there anything you would like to add?
No, thank you for your time.
Okay, please answer any question that the commissioners or counsel for Phillips 66 may have.
I do have a question. Oh, I'm sorry.
So you said in your preliminary appraisal, and I don't think we have a copy of the final, just the preliminary. Did you provide us with the final?
I did not provide you with the final because the final document that determined the market value for the parish was their own assessment. Yes.
So you said that you changed your mind on the 11% overall, and your final suggestion was an 11% for certain categories. What made you change your mind between the preliminary and the final to restrict that 11% obsolescence to just certain categories?
I noticed that 11% was applied in error to the other categories. And I think it was a leftover from the additional hurricane obsolescence that was applied in prior years. I just didn't notice that it was applied at that point in time.
So the hurricane was 11%, and then what you came up with for those categories was 11%?
No, the economic obsolescence in my appraisal was, I don't recall exactly what it was that was applied in the prior year in 2021. I think was applied everywhere as an additional help to the taxpayer to account for the massive damage from the hurricane. And so I had changed my model, and I didn't notice that that the economic obsolescence was going to categories that didn't need it. So at that point in time, in the preliminary appraisal.
I don't know if you can answer this question if the assessor is the right one to answer it, but when I look at, Exhibit 5, page 2, it says, for 2022, value reduced, and I'm gonna round off, 1.2 billion to 1 billion. And above it says granted 20% due to hurricane recovery and 2019 additions. When I do the arithmetic between the 1.2 and the 1 billion, I come up with 11%, which I suppose is your number. But it says that 20% was applied. Do we know where the 20% was applied?
That would be,
I said-
that's by the assessor's office, not by Pritchard
That-
Abbott.
that's
And
fine.
and I,
That's
and I'm
fine.
gonna recall,
That's why I prefaced it with.
Yes.
She may not be the,
and I
you may
will
not be the
recall
right
Assessor
person.
Aguilar to answer that
That's-
question.
that's fine. Also, what I want to know is exactly what the numbers are, as I asked taxpayer, what are the exact numbers that that the assessor is asking for? You know, in other words, what is the exact value that the assessor is asking for? So that there's no confusion.
So there's no
Yeah.
confusion. That is the valuation that was, certified to the commission, upheld by the board of review.
The $1 billion,
And I'm scraping to find that number, but,
Okay.
but it's a matter of record.
Sometimes in these hearings, we start hearing things and the numbers start becoming fluid.
Yes,
You've been here and seen that.
yes.
Numbers
yes,
can
I have.
become fluid. So that's why I always like to ask the bottom line, what is the value that both sides are asking for?
I have the,
And exactly the 11% should be applied to what number? What
The
assets?
If you look at Exhibit 3
Exhibit,
of the assessor document, the numbers, the original cost numbers shouldn't change terribly. The market value can change a little bit depending on where those numbers reside. But it's on the 2,598,460,348 that comprises the machinery and equipment category, which for Phillips 66, it includes their pumps, motors, compressors, fire suppression, safety equipment, and petroleum refining equipment, which Phillips 66 Calcasieu Parish rendered on their lap 5.
so on page 4, under the column 2022 original cost, machinery and equipment, the bottom number is 2,598,000,000.
Yes.
Subtract 11%.
Well, you have to subtract the index, you have to index it up and then depreciate it. And those numbers all change just a little bit, depending on where everything is. But you should refer to, that document, which is what the assessor sent to the taxpayer on what they owe. That document is the defining
Those
document.
calculations aren't provided. We don't have those calculations in the exhibits.
I'm sorry, which calculations?
It's not just simply subtracting 11%, talking about depreciation and other factors. We don't have, we don't show that in any of these exhibits, do we? Do you?
Can you direct us to where that exhibit is that you're referring to?
I'm gonna,
See our breakdown.
The person listing.
again, because it may not have picked up when Assessor Aguilar was testifying, that's taxpayer exhibit C. Pages 16 through 20.
All right, so it's that last column is where the 20% was applied,
Yeah,
that last column. Okay.
Wait, they can't hear you. You come to the mic. Just stay there. Go.
I'm sorry, it should be on the same items that Mr. Cisneros was also depreciating. It's the manufacturing, the pumps, all of it. Yes, sir.
Did you ever find the parish board of review number?
Yes.
Just want to make sure that, just like the chairman, that the number we have is the same number that you have.
I had it a moment ago. It is going to appear, again, all the exhibits are cross-referenced, so those documents that appear in the taxpayers exhibits, I simply adopted by reference. And if you look at taxpayer exhibit C, that should cross-reference to the a big valuation of 1,078,939,933. Has base number 016 at the bottom of that page.
I saw that, and that is a little different than our number. That's why I asked the question.
Will you say your number?
Number that, we were given as the board of review value is 1,049,204,866.
Maybe the assessor can clear it up when she comes back.
And I am going to be recalling the
Yeah,
assessor.
let's do that, and she can,
uh,
Wendy can clear
Commissioner
it up when she
Bircher.
comes back. Mr. Adams, do you have any questions?
I do. Trying to help figure out that number. If you look on page 16 of mine and on 89, it's 1,078,000,000.
And talking to the microphone, please.
If you look on the parcel listings on page 16, the taxpayer exhibits, the total market value is 1,078,939,933, which is the same number on the appeal form, but it includes improvements that are not part of the appeal. I think that's the difference. But the assessor can confirm that. I'm happy to do that. Let me go back and ask Ms. Khan a few questions. During your presentation, you were referring to inspection notes that go back a number of years, and just to confirm, prior to 2022, you were not involved in representing Pritchard and Abbott at Bill 66.
That is not correct.
Okay,
I started working and being directly involved with this site in 2020.
okay, 2020.
Yes.
So that's what I said, before 2020.
Oh, sorry, I misheard you.
That's
My
okay.
bad.
I mean, I understand. So my point of all, and you, I think the point of your discussion related to the ultra low sulfur diesel production unit and what Phillips 66 was doing or not doing. And I guess my question is, before 2020, you were not personally involved in any of those discussions.
That is correct.
So all you're doing is reading notes that someone else wrote.
That is correct.
And, but to go back to, if you were here earlier when Mr. Tyler testified,
Yes, I was.
and you heard his testimony that the ultra low sulfur diesel unit is not in their projected forecast.
Yes, I did hear
and-
that.
And you have no basis to dispute that testimony.
Not such that I could say definitively.
So in other words, no.
No.
You talked about models that you have that you use in preparing your analysis. Are those, is that something you've shared with the taxpayer?
Yes, it is. Not the model itself, but the printout of it. And that is taxpayer exhibit 4.
Could that be D?
If I list it, it should have my preliminary appraisal there. That is the model.
Oh, so,
Yes.
okay, this is taxpayer exhibit E. That is your,
Oh.
the model that you use
Mhm.
to put this all together. Okay. All right. But are there calculations and other things behind this that come up with the numbers?
No, there's just, all I do is I input the original cost. Hang on, let me open up what I saved here. So I input the category, year built, and original cost directly from the lat 5. Then there's the exempt cost, and that's where the LTCs go. And those are from the that list that they report for the lat 5s. So there's a non-exempt cost. So then there's an index factor, and that's directly from chapter 25 of the Louisiana tax code. And so then we can calculate a reproduction cost new, which is the taxpayer's number in the taxpayer's category times the chapter 25 index factor. Then we have the actual age and service life, which there sometimes are differences of opinion in service life categories that are not adequately defined in chapter 25, but most of the time they're pretty close. And then the percent good is directly from the chapter 25 table. And then we add an additional obsolescence factor, which is just that number that I typed in, which was from the calculation that was shown on my prior exhibit. And that's how we get to that calculated fair market value. So there's not really any behind the scenes
So,
calculation.
sorry. And so talking about your obsolescence, the 0.89 was purely a utilization factor.
No, 0.89 is the Chilton, the direct Chilton calculation of the utilization. The utilization was something like 80, I don't know, 80.
You said 82.31 or something?
Yeah, something like that. Is
that-
what the taxpayer communicated to me via that one document that I shared.
Okay, so that was the actual utilization without adjustment.
Yes,
And you adjusted it using the Chilton factor.
yes,
Okay, so that would, instead of 0.82 is 0.89.
yes.
All right. So, as I appreciate the Chilton factor is used to sort of try to compare two industrial things that are similar but different in size. Is that fair?
I
I know
think
that's
it,
simplified, but
I think it has been used in that capacity.
isn't that kind of what you explained in your,
Yes, I think that's what I read about. So
I'm sorry, what'd you say?
that, yes, that's what I
Okay.
believe I have read.
Well, I was just trying to look at what you put in your exhibit 5.
Mhm.
So the whole purpose of this idea is to take things that are of different size and find a way to try to make them comparable.
Well, it's to account for the economies of scale that exist that aren't necessarily, they're not like a direct relationship. So,
Okay. It sounds like a concept like the Nelson complexity factor, actually.
no, I would disagree with that assessment because there's a defined equation with defined characteristics.
Well,
The Nelson doesn't have, I'm sorry, the Nelson complexity does not have defined inputs. Because of the cost numbers that aren't published out in public record.
well, you testified a minute ago that Pritchard and Abbott has its own complexity analysis calculator. And that you exhibit 7 of the the assessor exhibits, you go through the exercise of coming up with complexity factors for 3 of the parcels that Mr. Cisneros referred to in his sales analysis.
Yes, we do have a calculator that existed when I joined the company. The numbers I'm pretty sure came from some cost program that's no longer supported. We have no way of updating it, so I don't put a lot of weight on, and you can see that they're all different. I mean, they're not too far, they're all different. They're not exact.
Well, and the Lake Charles factor is the same as Mr. Cisneros used in his calculations.
Yes, but not what Phillips 66 reported
Well,
and on their own website.
so you did go out to the website and look for this data.
Yeah, yes, I
All right,
did.
so you had it available to, if you, when you looked,
No, well, I had news reports of what the company reports as a news report. I had the EIA refining report, which has all the refineries and what capacities they have every year. And so and in some cases, some refineries did publish a factor, but usually they don't.
well, going back to your obsolescence calculation, is that you said it's a utilization factor with Chilton adjustment.
Yes.
So you didn't include anything related to the ultra low sulfur diesel.
The utilization factor includes in my opinion, includes all forms of functional and outside market obsolescence because the refinery was able to operate at that specific utilization rate that's 82% of their total capacity, despite any functional obsolescence that they have. And they probably have much more than just an ultra low sulfur diesel, lack of ultra low sulfur diesel, and whatever market conditions existed, which the market was pretty favorable in 2022. But
So what you're saying, the utilization is a reflection of the economic environment in which the refinery operates?
it's the economic and also the functional operation of the refinery.
But you don't consider the products that doesn't consider the products that are actually made, correct?
Well, it's not a direct consideration of the products, but they would only process that amount of crude to produce whatever products they can produce that's economically feasible for them to produce.
Okay.
So in
Yes,
a
so-
backdoor way.
So as your counsel would say, that's kind of a circular argument. Because it's just saying, because they produce it, then that must mean that the products justify the production.
In addition, Phillips 66 in Lake Charles does not tell me how many barrels per day on average they produce of any of their products. They only share how many barrels per day average that they process of crude.
Have you ever asked for the data related to the products that they make in the mix of them?
I have not directly asked, but when this year's inspection, I did directly ask for their basic capital spending list, and they told me it was not legally required to provide. They were not legally required.
Well, that, I guess it doesn't answer my question, but that's okay. So you heard Mr. Tyler testify earlier, and you'd mentioned the crack and what that is and means, and his testimony was that the Lake Charles refinery's crack is below the average because of the product mix. And you can't dispute that testimony, correct?
I don't have any better data to base any kind of opinion on. That is correct.
So just to reiterate, your obsolescence calculation is simply utilization using the Chilton piece. It didn't consider the ultra low sulfur diesel. It didn't consider the electric car issue. It didn't consider the fact that there, I guess would go into the whole idea of the diesel market as well, but that really didn't consider any of those factors by themselves.
Did not give individual consideration to any individual characteristics because the utilization encompasses all of those, but not individually.
Do you have any data in here that you provided that would support that testimony that utilization covers everything that needs to be considered?
It's my own appraiser understanding of the utilization rate and also my understanding as a project engineer. You only operate something as much as it's economically feasible to operate. If it's no longer economically feasible to operate, they're gonna shut it down.
Well, and that is a great segue to Exhibit 6, where you have the refinery utilization capacity statistics that you talked about briefly, and you talk about the Louisiana Gulf Coast area. And in 2022, the gross input was, it's in different numbers, but 3,193, which is a drop from 2021 and a significant drop from 2017, 2018, and 2019. And I think you even alluded to it. A part of that, at least, is a result of refinery closures along the Gulf Coast, correct?
Yes, I did.
That's including the Shell Convent refinery, which closed for economic reasons.
Yes, they're converting it to green fuel. I saw that story recently.
And then the Phillips 66 Alliance refinery, which you actually assessed for this year as well.
Yes, I assessed, that's no longer a refinery. That's a
And then you get
terminal.
closed for hurricane and economic reasons.
It closed because of hurricane damage predominantly. It was no longer economic to repair that refinery.
And let me ask this question. Exhibit 5, your economic obsolescence. Did you ever share that with Phillips 66?
I shared the factor results. I did not share the calculation specifically. They didn't ask for it though either.
Well, did you let them know that it existed?
I would assume that they would know that it existed, especially being a former Pritchard and Abbott employee.
So, and I wanted to, you didn't really talk much about it, and I understand why. We're getting towards the end of the day, but you had comments about the, electric cars and the market and you showed the graph and, but you can't dispute that there's certainly a drive towards electric cars in America right now, politically and.
I will admit that in well-to-do parts of the country, you can see more Teslas driving around. But well-to-do parts of the country are a small, tiny percentage of the massive amount of vehicles that exist.
And I think we have testament or evidence in the record as well around states requiring that electric cars be only sold in the future. And I guess part of my question is you include this article in the Wall Street Journal, and it does talk about, from July of 2022 or almost August, so well after the date, about the state of the industry. And, one of the things it talks about is that, it takes a refinery about 20 years to recoup investment.
Yes, they were talking about how conditions do not exist to build new refineries.
Or if you're going to invest one, make sure you have enough time to recoup your investment.
Yes, but it's basically, they don't see a lot of new refineries in the United States in particular coming online, and I think even worldwide to a certain extent, if I remember that article correctly.
So the taxpayer exhibit E, which is the preliminary analysis you did. And are you a certified appraiser?
Yes, I am.
By
I'm a level 3 right now. I have one more class to do, and then I'll be a level 4 in Texas, in the state of Texas, the license board there.
Okay, so, but as someone with that certification, this isn't technically appraisal, is it?
Yes, it is.
It goes through all three approaches to evaluation?
It's a cost approach. We do not have any information for an income approach appraisal, so that the income approach was not considered. And then market approach has a lot of weaknesses to it. So if that particular refinery sold, that might be a market sale to consider, but in general, I don't think market sales are terribly indicative of a particular refinery's value, just because of the weaknesses that I pointed out.
But to be compliant with uniform standards of appraisal, you have to technically consider all three, correct?
Yes,
And
and
then reconcile value,
well,
even if you decide
this
one's
is-
not applicable.
this is more of a math appraisal than a fee-based appraisal. So it would be use PAP 5. And I did consider market approach, and not that I shared with Phillips 66 Lake Charles Parish.
So that's something you consider but didn't share.
Yes.
And so it's not part of the record. Yeah. Mr. Chairman, I don't believe I have any further questions.
All right, thank you.
I think I have no regret. Thank you, Ms. Khan.
When you did these numbers for your preliminary appraisal, I understand that there was a mistake with the 11% that was applied overall, and you adjusted that for your final. Did you adjust any of the other numbers or totals on these amounts?
I did adjust some life, the lives of a,
Just total, just the fair
Just-
market value?
it changed some because of some minor adjustments to some other things like life.
So what was the final machinery and equipment number?
Can we refer to that? No, not on here. The final number is on this parcel listing.
So that's your number? That is
Yes.
your number and you verified
Yes.
that that's
Mhm.
correct? Okay. And that's before the economical obsolescence, because that's the number I'm asking for is fair market value before that was applied.
That's on the. fair market-
Actually, that does include economic obsolescence, because if you look at the next few pages through page 20, you'll see particularly on 17 and 18, that's the M&E. It does include the 20%.
Thank you. That's just what I needed to know.
And I would like to recall Assessor Aguilar for a couple of cleanup questions I believe the commissioners had. First, Assessor Aguilar, there's some confusion about, what is the number you're asking to be upheld? And taxpayer exhibit C is your parcel listing.
Correct.
Is this better? And I did pass over to, I'm usually so loud, I don't need a mic. I'll start with Assessor Aguilar. There was some question earlier about what valuation are you asking the tax commission to uphold? And the document listed as taxpayer exhibit C, cross-referenced as a assessor exhibit 4, list a fair market value of $1,078,939,933, correct?
That is correct.
And there's a slightly different number listed on the appeal documents followed by Phillips 66. And I'm trying to find a cross-reference. Where they list a value of personal property of $1,049,204,866. Do you have any idea why those two numbers are different?
Yes. So if you look at the total valuation, that's the total valuation of this parcel, which is the 1,078,939,933. The personal property is that number less the building, the leasehold improvements, which is not being disputed by the taxpayer. And so that's the difference in that number. But basically, I'm asking you to uphold the valuation that I currently have on this assessment.
Which is $1,049,204,866.
Yes, sir.
And the remainder of it was uncontested by the taxpayer. And I'm sorry, I forgot what the second question the commissioners had that I was going to recall her for. I should have. I believe we answered it earlier. Oh, I'm sorry, I do recall. There were some questions about the level of obsolescence. I'm sorry, those items that obsolescence was applied to. Again, the 20% that your office had come up with. And I believe you testified earlier, but can you just clarify what items on the asset listing received a 20% reduction for obsolescence?
Absolutely. So I believe when Karen submitted her appraisal to us is when we discovered the 11% was given to all of the items on her appraisal, and stated that we would only be giving obsolescence on the pumps and fire suppression and so forth, the same items that Mr. Cisneros was applying his obsolescence to as well. And you will see that 20% decrease on page 17 and 18 on those items. And that directly relates to the same items that Mr. Cisneros was applying the obsolescence to on his.
And page 17 and 18 of which exhibit?
That would be, taxpayer exhibit C, which is one of the cross-referenced assessor exhibits.
Anything
Do they,
else?
okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Then one more question. In assessor exhibit 5, page 2 of 5, there was a table. And it says for 2022 that a 20% obsolescence reduction was applied. And Chairman Shahardy pointed out a moment ago that he kind of calculated and came up with 11 or 12%. Would that be attributable to the fact that you only applied it to those assets that you just identified?
That is correct.
Thank you. Commissioners, I don't believe you had any other questions. If you do, I would tender.
Any questions from the commission?
Can you just explain to me what the difference between, on page 17, the difference between the first manufacturing plant and then the plant manufacturing below it, just, it's 16.5, it's a total of 5.9 million, and then the one that was 1.036 billion that you actually did the 20%. What's the difference in those assets?
So these would be, in our computer system, the classification is just manufacturing plant. So these items are within quote unquote a manufacturing plant. It's going to be all of that equipment that doesn't have a specific title, I guess, in our computer. So it's listed as a manufacturing plant. The one at the top is the restricted for this particular location that is not currently on ITEP. And the others are the additional equipment. So it sounds kind of convoluted, but it's how we account for the items as a manufacturing plant within our computer system.
And the reason that the ones at the top didn't get the 20% adjustment?
I believe because those are restricted items. Those would be restricted items on current ITEP projects. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. No, ma'am.
Any other questions? Mr. Adams, do you have any questions for the
I
assessor?
just, I don't want to I don't want to get back into this, but just, so the preliminary work papers that Ms. Khan testified about that had the 0.89 applied to everything. But when you did the parcel listings, the 20% applied only to the manufacturing assets.
Correct.
that there was no adjustment, no adjusted work papers provided to 466 that showed that as far as, just on the parcel list.
Yes,
Okay.
he received that information here.
All right,
Yes.
no further questions.
All right,
And I have no further witnesses.
thank you. Okay. Mr. Adams, that conclude?
That concludes our presentation.
Okay, real quickly, again, I know I asked it earlier, but I need to ask again. From the taxpayer standpoint,
Yes, sir.
all right, just like to make sure. All right, anybody got any more questions? All right, well, I want to thank both sides for coming today. And by the standards of having a court reporter, this one went pretty quick. So, thank you all for coming. I make the motion that we take this matter under advisement. Is there any objection to the motion? There being no objection to the motion, the motion stands adopted.
Thank you
all
for your
again.
time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
There being no other matters to come before the commission at this time, that concludes the docket. Is that correct? No other matters to come before us. I will accept the motion to adjourn.
Mr. Chairman, I move for adjournment.
We have a motion to adjourn. Is there any objection to the motion? There being no objection to the motion, motion stands adopted and